Well, I'm Deacon Germain, as Paul mentioned. I'm ordained in the Archdiocese of Hartford, and at St. Mary and Co. Parish, and there's two churches, St. Catherine and St. Philip's. I've been interested in the Shroud since the early 80s. Of assistant pastor where my wife grew up and where we were after we were married. He had his own copies like this, and he would hang them in the church during Lent. So it was a very powerful tool, and it got me interested in it back then. So I wouldn't say I'm an expert on it. I have taken certified, I'll be all right. I took a course from Rome, 18-month course, so I'm not expert, but I know a lot more than the normal person in the last few years. This time of year, I like to warn people. If you watch like the History Channel or Discovery Channel and some of those channels, they always have documentaries on the Shroud. You can't believe everything they say. I'll just leave it at that, right? You'll do there. Father took a few of my minutes, so I'll go as anyone really worried about getting out of here at noontime? Okay, good. All right. People have heard of the Shroud of Turin, right? Yeah. It's also known as the Holy Shroud. The reason it's called the Shroud of Turin is because it's in Turin, Italy, and it's been there since 1578. Come on, turn it on. Dingo. Come on. I tested it before. Oh, maybe that. It was working. There he goes. Yeah, I got it. It's just whether here it goes. Okay. I'll go back. Go back. Can everybody hear me from here, or do I need to really that microphone's loud? All right, what is the Shroud of Turin? It's currently located at the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy. Its dimensions are 14 feet 3 inches and 3 feet 7 inches, which just happens to be 8 by 2 cubits of the Syrian or Asian cubits. It's a linen fabric, a herringbone weave with a Z twist. It has a faint image of a crucified person. This is what it looks like to the naked eye, this coloring. This is a 4-foot copy of the 14-foot piece. These are actually life-size, so if you put these together, that's how large the actual shroud is. It has the front here in the dorsal there. And on here, you can see that here's the frontal and then the back. We'll explain that a little bit later. It has blood marks on the body image. It has burn marks. These patches here are burn marks that have been repaired, and you can see them on both sides. There's water damage. You can see water stains up here at the corners, here, in the middle. We'll explain those. It has crease marks. You can see a lot of crease marks here, showing they had been folded. Anyone who has linens at home, you know that getting the creases out of it is very difficult. There's pieces of the shroud cut out. There's a piece here and a piece at the bottom there. You'll get to see a little bit closer. It's the most scientifically studied artifact in human history. It testifies to the most important doctrines of Christianity: the crucifixion, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus, we hope. Okay. All right, a little religious lesson here. This is John chapter 19. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him scourged. And the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and placed it on his head and clothed him in a purple cloak. And they came and called and said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him repeatedly. We always depict in crucifixes and in portraits a nice little crown, a round circle. Well, these were Roman soldiers. They wouldn't have had taken the time to do that. So what we believe actually was, and what the shroud shows, is that this was a cap of thorns that was just stuck on this person's head and banged down. So you can see on a large image, you can see the blood stains on the back and the top of the head here, and you can see blood stains here. So it was a crown of thorns, like a cap. And these thorns here that are on here are a good 2.5 inches long. Okay. When a person is scourged, back then particularly, they would tie him to a pole, and his back would be shown there, and they would whip him, the back mostly. You can see the scourge marks here, from the bottom of the calves all the way up to the back and the shoulders. This is a flagrum. It would have been a wooden handle with leather strips and metal balls on the end of it. From the measurements and the scientific study on these pieces here, they can tell that there were two men. One was left-handed, one was right-handed, and one was taller than the other. That would have whipped him from both sides. There are some scourge marks on the front where they would have whipped it, and it would have went around and hit him in the front of the chest. Had they scourged anybody in the front, they would have died very shortly after, because you would have had all that pain on your chest. That's sort of a recreation of a Roman flagrum. This leather, these straps are about 18 inches, 2 feet long, and then these little metal balls. Sometimes they had like bones that would cut and rip the skin, but on the shroud it shows just little dumbbell-shaped bruises. There was also other types of marks on the shroud image. This was just a handle with leather straps. And sometimes you've heard in the scriptures where, as they were bringing Jesus to Herod, they would whip him, strap him, like kind of herd him along like cattle, and that's what they would use. And then another one here, these are very stiff reeds, and they would have whipped them. So they actually have 3 types of wounds on the shroud, the most being from the Roman flagrum. Once more, Pilate went out and said to them, "Look, I bring him out to you so that you may know that I find no guilt in him." So Jesus went out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple cloak, and he said, "Behold the man." Then he handed him over to be crucified. In carrying the cross himself, he went out in the place of the skull, in Hebrew, Golgotha. And they crucified him with 2 others on one side and on the other. Now, we all seen movies. They show Jesus carrying the cross. That would have been impossible. Because what the Romans did, they had the staves, the vertical piece, in the ground already. So what Jesus carried, or the shroud shows that this person on the shroud carried the pallium. It was the horizontal piece that he would have had his arm tied to. It would weigh about 170 pounds. So that's what he was carrying when he went along. Oh, I went the wrong way. Like that. And then when they would have gotten him to there, and then they nailed him to the cross, they would have taken this and raised it up and put it on top of the stipes there. Roman nails were about 7 inches long and had a round top on it. The Romans are very good at crucifixion by this point. So what they would do, they rounded, so at the end, after they needed to take them down, all they would have to do is bang the hammer, or a hammer, on the end of the nail, and that would break off, and they would just pull the person off the nails. Because, big 7-inch nails, you would need a big crowbar to do that, right? So they're very good at what they did. and that's about the size of your palm, about 7 inches. Now, the other thing we always see is that the nail holes are in the palm of the hand, right? Yeah. If you put a nail here and having a person 170 pounds, it would rip right through. So what they did is if you take your finger and thumb, you can feel this section right here. The nail would have went in there and come out here. You can feel a hole, like a divot, bones there, this spot. So it would have went through there and came here. So that would hold up the body. Most people die on the cross from asphyxiation, right? At the bottom of the cross, there's usually a little platform, and they nail the nails there. So then that way the person can breathe. In order to breathe, they have to lift up, breathe, and then they fall down. And they lift up, and they fall down. And eventually they die of asphyxiation. Now, since it was preparation day, in order that the bodies may not remain on the cross for the Sabbath day of the week was a solemn. The Jews asked Pilate to have their legs broken and to be taken down. So the two people that were crucified with Jesus at the time, they broke his legs. Why do you think that was? So they couldn't push up and breathe, so they would die much quicker. But Jesus was already dead, so they broke the other two, and Jesus was already dead, so they didn't break his legs, and they thrust a lance in his side. Okay. And blood and water flowed out. So back then they didn't know better, but blood, when you die, separates between the white and the red blood cells, right? So this is also proof that Jesus was dead on the cross, because when the lance went in, blood and water came out. Well, St. John didn't know anything about white blood cells and red blood cells, but he saw clear liquid and blood come out, right? So that's another depiction that Jesus was dead on the cross. This is the lance of destiny. This is what they believe was the actual lance head that was used to spear Jesus. This particular one is in Venice, and there's another one in the Vatican. So it's, they're going to fight on which is the real one, but it's really long. That's the destiny. Now, the burial of Jesus. After Joseph Arimathea secretly discipled Jesus for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate if he could remove the body, and Pilate permitted it. So they came and took his body. Nicodemus, the one who had come first at night, also brought mixtures of myrrh, aloe, weighing about 100 pounds. They took the body, bound it in a burial cloth, along with the spices, according with Jewish burial. According to Jewish burial, anything that had blood on it had to be buried with the body. Yeah? On the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early in the morning while it was still dark and saw that the stone was removed. She went to Simon Peter and the other disciple whom Jesus loved, and told them they had taken the Lord down from the tomb and they don't know where they put him. So Peter and the other disciple went out and came to the tomb. They both ran. The other disciple faster than Peter. That's why we assume it's St. John, he was younger. Arrived at the tomb first. He bent down, saw the burial cloths, plural, and did not go in, waited for Simon Peter. They arrived and saw the burial cloths there. The cloths had covered his head, not the burial cloth, but rolled up in a separate place. This is the Cedarium Oviedo. It's in Spain, Oviedo, Spain. When Jesus was still on the cross, he died about 3 o'clock, and they took him down before 6, before sundown. So for modesty and also the collection of blood and serum that was coming out, they covered his head with a cloth. around, and it collected the blood and everything. You can see where, this does not work there, but see how like the eyes here and the nose and the fluids? That's what Peter and John saw separately, right? There's no image on the cloth, so it wasn't on the body when the image was created. And there's a story back when we went to Scripture, they saw it folded out the side. During the Last Supper, not the Last Supper, a Jewish Passover dinner, when the head of the household left the table, if he was done eating, he would just crumple up his napkin and put it on the table. And that signaled the servants they're allowed to clean the table off. But if it was folded, that means he's coming back. So this napkin was folded in the tomb, which gave Peter and John indication that he's going to return. Right? This is the believed path where the shroud had been. Of course, it was in Jerusalem. Then they believe it went to Antioch, Edessa, can't say that one, Constantinople, Athens, and then it was up in Léry, France, and it went down and ended up in Turin. And here's where Oviedo is for the Siderium. This is what the shroud looks like to the naked eye, 14 feet long. You can see this side is the frontal, and that side is the back. You can see the scorch marks. You can see the patches. You can see watermarks. The thing with the shroud, let's see what's my next one here? We'll get to more detail. So it goes from Jerusalem to Edessa, 944, then in Constantinople to 1204. And they believe in the Fourth Crusade, when Constantinople was sacked, somebody took it and they brought it up to Léry, France, where it resurfaced in 1353 on exposition. And then it went to Chambéry, and then in Turin in 1578. So that's the path. The only documentation we have for sure is we have some myths or some written stories from here to there and here, but from 1353 to 1578 to the present, we have documentation on the ownership and where it was at the time, right? And it went from Chambéry to Turin, and like I said, in 1578. Charles Borromeo, who happened to be the Bishop of Milan, was going to travel to France to see it on exposition. But at the time, he was in his 80s. So at this time, between 1353 and 1450, the Savoy family became the owner of the shroud. So in 1578, Charles Borromeo was going to go to France to see it, and the Savoy family says, no, don't travel that far. We have a summer palace in Turin, and we'll bring it there. And then he actually walked from Milan to Turin to see the shroud in 1578. This is Abgar VII. He's from Edessa, and you can kind of see he's holding what looks like a picture of just a head of a figure. That's called, it's the cloth of Edessa. Make sure I get this right here. Edessa. Anyways, what you're really seeing in this picture is the shroud folded up enough that only the face is showing, right? And the story goes, or the legend goes, is that Abgar VII had leprosy. And he wrote a letter to Jesus when he was in Jerusalem saying, can you come? I hear you're a great healer. Come and heal me. And Jesus writes back to him and says, I'm kind of busy here. I'll send somebody later. So after the resurrection, and they sent the shroud, which is that folded up, to Abgar. And when he received it, he was totally healed of, what did I say he was healed? Leprosy, thank you. Oh, it's tough getting old. So he was totally cured of leprosy. And so that's how the shroud got to Odessa in 944. Okay. These two paintings or icons were from the 1300s. And you can kind of see they look a lot like what the shroud is. So there's other proof that the shroud was in existence around the early 1300s, because in order for someone to create this icon, they would have had to seen the shroud in person, right? So that's called the Man of Sorrows on one side, on that other side there. The Man of Sorrows, this was from Odessa. They calculated using computers and cameras that the creases that we see here were marked up like this here and folded just right and placed over wooden dowels so they could raise up the shroud and venerate it every Friday in Odessa. So they would look, every Friday would come up, you see this full view here, and then they would lower it back into the box. And they calculated that all those crease marks and how they've actually recreated this mechanism in the 1990s and proved that that's what those creases are for. This is a medallion from Larry, France in 1355. If you ever gone to a state fair or anything, they always have a medallion struck and it says, you know, welcome to World Fair. And well, that's what they did here in 1355. You can see that there's a back image here and a frontal image there. And these are the crown and crest of the Savoy family. And so they were like souvenir medallions. They found this one, I think there's only two in existence now, and they found one of them in the Thames River in England. This is another graving from 1578 where they did an exposition. And you can see they had bishops and priests and hold up the shroud. They physically held it up with their hands on a balcony for people to see it. This is from a prayer codex from 1190, and it kind of shows you how the body was laid in the shroud. They laid his back and then covered it over in the front. And you can kind of tell that it wasn't perfect, because over here you can see that well, maybe you can't see in the back, but they put him on the shroud and they started covering and they said, oh, no, it doesn't quite go over all the way. So you can see more of the back of the feet instead of the front of the feet on the image. And they close it. This is the Cathedral of St. John in Turin. This was from 1978 when they had an exposition on the shroud. You can see people would go in that side, you go in front of the shroud and you come back out, and then they would line up. You can't see it well here, but I'll show you a picture there. There was over a couple million people that came and saw the shroud. That's the cue to wait, to watch, to look at the shroud. When we went as a church trip back in 2015, they had a ticket. You could go on register, and they would tell you what time to get there, almost like a fast pass at Disney. So you didn't have to wait a long time, but these people waited 10 hours or so to see it. And you were only in front of the shroud for about a minute and a half. And this is in the nave of the church looking back towards the back altar where the shroud was put. There are people here standing in front on a platform. This is John Paul II. See how far he is away from the shroud? There's a reason for that. The shroud is invisible, or the image is invisible any closer than 10 feet. So if you get right up on it, you don't see anything. you have to be back about 10 feet in order to see the image. Some of you might remember newspapers. Remember the dots on a newspaper? If you look real close to the picture, it's all made up of dots. That's pretty much what this is, and we'll go into detail. So that's why John Paul is that far away. Not that they don't want him to get close, it's just you can't see it if you don't get any closer. This is a reliquary that was stored in before 1990. It was a gold box, silver lined box, and they would roll up and they would put it in, and they would have it behind bulletproof glass, and at night it would be lowered into that bottom box area for protection. It had bulletproof glass, silver and wooden casket. That's the current reliquary. It's over 14 feet long, over 3 feet, almost 4 feet wide. It's hermetically sealed, filled with argon gas, so they wouldn't kill any bacteria. And it's especially bulletproof glass to try to protect it longer, because the image is slowly fading away. All right, King Umberto II. Why is he important? He's the last king of Italy. He's from the Savoy family, and he was the current owner of the Shroud in 1978 when they did the testing and they did the experiments. He passed away in 1983, and in his will, he willed the ownership of the Shroud to the current Pope. So Pope Francis currently owns the Shroud, but it has to stay in Turin. It's part of the proviso. So Pope Francis now owns the Shroud. This is what it looks like, stretched out where the scientists were looking at it in 1978. These are the American scientists here. You notice they have their hands behind their back. They were told by the Italians if they touched it with their hands, they'd be shot. So they kept their hands back. Yeah. You can almost see this image here as like a gold image. That's a platform that they brought to check the Shroud out. Does this gold look familiar to anybody? That's gold foil. They got it from NASA because gold wouldn't react with anything on the linen. So these are actually panels about 2 feet wide, and they're all covered with gold foil. And this table is specially made to rotate around. They can tip it lower. So if they were going to do like x-rays, they would have to remove the metal plate and then take x-rays and put the plate back on. This is the STIRP team in 1978. And you can see that the table is turned up where they're taking pictures. And you can see all these little paper dots. Those are all coordinate numbers. So like on a map, A1. So whenever they took samples or took pictures of anything, they knew exactly where it was coming from the Shroud. So because they spent 250 hours in 1978 continuously taking samples, taking pictures, UV pictures, ultraviolet light pictures, x-rays, everything you can think of, they took. They were there to try to find out how the image was made. And that was in 1978. We're in 2025. They still don't know how it was made. They have some inkling, but they don't know. Again, the Shroud here, how it looks, these patches right there, and that's a scorch mark. In 1534, 1540, 1553, I have it written somewhere. In the 1500s, it was in that like silver reliquary box like we saw. There was a fire in Chambéry, France. And it got so hot that the silver melted on the inside of the box and dripped onto the Shroud. So if you can picture a Shroud being folded into 8 pieces or more, and it burned through one corner, when you open it, it would have gone through all the different layers, right? And that's what these are. These are patches. So in 1534, the fire was in 1532, 1534, the Portland nuns sewed in linen patches into these holes because it would start fraying and fray more. So they sewed them onto the patches. And you can see them on both sides. So it was folded up. burned through one corner when you open it. It's almost like taking a piece of paper when you were a kid and cutting corners and open it up and you get a snowflake. So that's how it was there. Let's see, where are we going to go with this next? All right. So here's just a frontal image. You can see, my laser pointer is not going on the TV. You can see the patches. You can see the scorch mark. You can see the water marks here up and top. You can see the missing pieces here. And there's a fine line that goes all the way up, about 3.5 inches. And what that was is here you can see it here clearly, more clearly, right here. And you should be able to see it on that side, on the left. There's this march. What they've shown happen is they ripped off a piece 3.5 inches the whole length, and then when they folded the shroud over Jesus, they would have taken that and they would have wrapped it. Not like a mummy, but just enough to hold the top and the bottom together. And then once they found the shroud after, they sewed it back on. And the stitching used was only used in the 1st century in Edessa. That stitching was an ancient stitching. And here's the back. You can see the scourge marks. This here is blood flow from the side wound here. When the lance went in, hit between the 5th and 6th rib all the way up and hit the heart sac. Blood and water came out. And when they laid him down, it still was bleeding and it flowed along the back. And it made that flow there. All right. I know I had it somewhere. So this, like little black dots. If you get close or further away from that, what you get is that. So that's kind of like the shroud is the image is just discoloration of the linen fibers. Here's another one. You just see the dots. And if you go farther away, you see that. All right. So you've been thinking, I know you've been thinking, this is what it looks like when I'm looking at it with my eyes, right? Where does that come from? Anybody have any idea? Shh, you know. Okay. Secundo Pia was an amateur photographer / lawyer, or he's a lawyer / amateur photographer. And in 1898, photography had only been around maybe 30, 40 years. So he was allowed to take a picture of the image of the shroud. And when he developed it, see, this is his camera. That's the camera that these were made by. So this is a 35 millimeter, and it actually used 8x10 glass plates. You remember in some of the movies you saw they take off the lens cap and they sit back and nobody move for about 10 minutes? Put it back on? Well, that's the camera. That was, and when he, all right. So film, you guys don't know what film is. The rest of us know what film is, right? Everything dark is light, left is right, right is left, up is down, down is up. So that's the film negative of this picture, right? If we go back quick, we can see something's over here on the left. This is light, this is dark. Here's the fireplace. This is now dark and light. So everything is flipped. So there's what you can see with the naked eye. That's what happened when he developed his film on his plate. You can see, if you go back, take notice. This is a blood stain in the sigma. This goes from up, down to up. This one goes from here to there. You can see everything is flipped.
Did they have points on the eyes?
We'll get there, but I personally don't believe so, because they say there's lepton coins from Pontius Pilate's era. Well, first of all, a real Jewish burial would not use Roman coins, right? And I have an image at home. I don't know if you can see here. I have an image of just the face, and I can see the irises of the eyes. So if there was a coin in the way, I couldn't see anything, right? What they did is they took the shroud with electron microscopes, and they kind of like went deep as they could. You ever been looking outside and looking at clouds and you say, oh, I see an elephant. Somebody says, no, I see a giraffe. No, that's what's happening. They see what they kind of want to see. But I personally don't believe that there was ever the coins on the eyes. But this is a picture of his original developed film. You can see the teeth of the person up here. You can come up later and see. You can see teeth. You can see the fingers. These fingers look long because what you're seeing is the fingers from here all the way up to here, like an X-ray. All right. So this is the original photographs from 1898. This is the image, and that's the developed one. They didn't believe him. It took someone until 1931 to redo it for people to believe. They thought that Secundo Pio made it up. He doctored everything just to make publicity, so they didn't believe him. But this was one from 1931. That's another one. You can see, this is larger. Can you see teeth? You see teeth? Oh, and you notice that this is now in the shape of a 3. Where the other one, it was a sigma. And there's a 1931 and a 1978 one. So cameras got better throughout the time. You can really see the teeth now. And there they are side by side. You can see all the wrinkles and everything going in opposite directions. The blood, sigma versus a 3. Here's the hands. You notice that the blood's flowing down. Like here, this one's going to the right. This one goes up. So blood over here goes from left to right here. Blood there. This happens because his arms were up, right, at an angle. So it would have flowed down. And by the time the image was done, the blood was kind of dried here. So that's why it's kind of flat. And this is going this way. So his arms would have been up and the blood would have flowed down. This is the foot, front of the foot down here. You can see so there was only 3 nails, 2 in the hands and 1 in the feet that went through. He would have had left over right like that. It went through the front of the foot. And here's the bottom of the foot. You can see this hole underneath was visible with a lot of blood, and then the other one is just a little, because that would have been the one on top. And here's the ventral and the dorsal next to each other. All right. VP8 image analyzer. This was a machine that was developed by NASA, actually jet propulsion. And what it was meant to do is when they flew the lunar Apollo missions around the moon, they would take black and white pictures, right? And then they would take them and put them under this machine, and it would show the topography from black and white pictures based on the relative darkness and lightness of the photo. Well, back in 1976, 2 scientists were playing with this, and they put a picture of the shroud under that machine. So this is a regular picture. They put a regular picture under the machine, and they got this gobbledygook stuff. They put the shroud under there, and this is what they got. You can see the three-dimensional. So the shroud also has three-dimensional information on it. And this is what got them started doing the scientific testing again. They said something's got to be going on with this shroud because a normal picture doesn't have that much information on it. And if you think about it, see, the shroud wouldn't have been touching the chin necessarily, definitely not the neck, but the neck still shows up in the image. So it's not by contact that the image was done on a cloth. Right? And it would have went all the way down to the feet. It would have touched the knees because the knees are there. This is a three-dimensional image. They made this based on the information on the shroud. So that's what they felt the body was in the position, in the shape. The knees were up because the body was still in rigor mortis. Rigor mortis lasts less than 72 hours, right? So this tells us that the body was in the tomb for less than 72 hours because it still has rigor mortis. So it also depicts or gives us indication that within 3 days the resurrection happened. This is a 1 centimeter sample of the shroud. You can see the herringbone weave, very expensive weave. Okay. Now each thread is made of multiple fibrils. So there could be 200 fibrils per thread, right? This is a close-up of the back of the neck. You can see blood. You don't see any pictures, but you can see the discoloration of the fibers here, some on top. Wherever there's blood on the shroud, the thread was saturated with blood. Went all the way through the fibrils, right? That's where the blood, there's a picture of blood on the shroud. You can see that the fibrils were soaked through. Wherever the image is, only 2 or 3 fibrils have changed color. That's the dotting of it. So that tells them that there's no liquid, dyes, binders. It couldn't have been done with painting it, because the paint would have went right through. So there's no culprit. This is a picture of the tip of the nose. And if we assume that the nose was touching the shroud, you get close to it, that's all you see. Again, you have to be 10 feet away. But you can see the discoloration of the fibrils. Some are darker, some are lighter. This is just, again, it's physically it's impossible to use any liquid, otherwise the fibrils would have been totally soaked. Here's a water stain up close under a microscope. You can see the weave. We'll go back. You can see the weave better. Herringbone weave with a Z twist was very expensive to do back then. I mean, we're talking 2,000 years ago, right? That's why another reason we believe that Joseph of Arimathea, who was a rich person, was able to buy the cloth. So this is, anything that's charred is charred right through also. So burning couldn't have caused the image. This is the shroud backlit with light. What don't you see? You don't see an image. You see blood, you see watermarks, you see the scorches, you see the patches. There's no image. In fact, there's no image under any of the blood stains. So that means the blood had to be there first. Because if someone was ever going to fake it, they'd have to put the bloods down before knowing whether they were going to draw the picture, which is impossible even today, probably with a maybe with a computer they could do it. All right. These are the infamous poker holes. You can see them better over here. They're like L-shaped holes here. And it goes from there, and then here, and here. what they think or believed happened prior to 1190, for sure, that it was folded into 4 pieces, 4 folds, and placed and used as an altar cloth. Because what they're thinking is somebody was doing the thuriber and bumped and incense came out and it burned. And you can see, I think I got a closer look. You can see this must have been the top because it's burned more, burning more but less, burning less, and then less. So we're thinking this is the top, the second, the third, and the 4th fold. They're known as the poker holes. Again, that's this image here. The pieces that are missing, well, again on the back piece. Down here in the left corner, there's a big hunk missing. Well, when the Savoy family owned it, it's over here on the left here, and there's a piece over here that they took off. When the Savoy family owned it all those years, whenever there was a big anniversary or wedding or something, they would display it, 1. 2, they would cut off pieces and give them to people as relics. Can you imagine taking the burial cloth of Christ and cutting it up to give it to people, right? But they didn't know better. So that's what those patches are there. That's what that's from. Again, here's some for you can. It's just showing the blood again, and this is the back of the head with all the blood from the thorns. This is the blood stain from the side wound, right there. And unfortunately, there's a patch there, so you can't really see everything. But that's where the blood flowed down the back. Here's the hands again. You can see everything's flipped, right to left, left to right. There's underneath the foot. Again, closer. Here's the back wounds. Now, also, there's like little dumbbells here, shaped bruises, but they all can see closely. There's a bruising across the back, like at a left to right angle. So when he was carrying the paralabum, when he fell, those 3 times, it had to rub on his shoulders and created bruises. Oh, over there, I just noticed too. There's a ponytail right there. So Jesus had a ponytail. And there's the back of the head. You can see the ponytail better there. And here, this is a close-up of the scourge marks. You can see like the little dumbbells. Here's really hard hit here, and there's like a between bruising. So there's 312 wounds on the shroud. Can you imagine getting hit with that 312 times? Here's a close-up where the wound is by the patch. Now, with ultraviolet fluorescent photography, I got another picture, but here's the red blood cells, and you can see like a halo around here, and that's the white blood cells of the serum. Anyone they wanted to believe that this was a forgery from the Middle Ages from 1290 to 1310. Now, I don't know even Da Vinci knew about red and white blood cells to know that, and you can't even see this without ultraviolet fluorescent photography. So another mark against someone who's making it a forgery back then. Again, here's it separates. And you can see this, it points out the halo of the serum around the wound. This is mapped out of all the different places where the blood spattered were. So under any of those marks, there's no image. Here's the water stains we see. And they kind of look uniformed. So what they think happened is that the shroud was wrapped up, folded and wrapped, and put it in a ceramic jar for hiding, and it got damp inside. So one corner was in like dampness water, and it wicked up. So when you opened it up, it looked like, do I have it again? Yeah, see? So these corner pieces would have had water stains by that. And they've tested that, and they come out with the same results too. That was probably when it was hidden in Odessa. All right. These are magnifying pictures of pollen they found on the shroud. And we all know about pollen, especially if you have hay fever. It's all over the place. So think of every time that this was exposed to the air, it would pick up pollen. Dr. Riggi, he vacuumed the shroud, both the top and the bottom, and he collected all these samples. Unfortunately, he did some testings, but he passed away. So his wife donated them to other scientists to continue the work. We haven't heard anything relatively new. So there was 58 species of pollen, 17 from Europe. The remaining species do not grow in Europe. They came from Africa, Asia, and Middle East. Of the 58, 55 are from Jerusalem. And some of them, the plants don't exist anymore. And 3 were not from Jerusalem. Where do you think they were from? Any guesses? Remember that map? Odessa, Constantinople. Yep, Odessa and Constantinople. So even if you weren't a believer, you had to know that at least it was in that area at the time, sometime in its life. So it just shows Jerusalem, Odessa, Europe, and Constantinople. The Europe would have been when it was in France, right? All right. 2002 restoration of the shroud. The top one is pre-2002. The bottom one is after 2002. Well, whoever was in charge of the shroud, they took off the old backing cloth, because there was a backing cloth sewed to the back so it would help keep it together. And they replaced it with a whiter one so it makes it look brighter. They also ironed out all the creases. It's like, oh, and they didn't tell anybody they were doing this. So if you ever see an image, you kind of have to know whether it was before 2002 or after 2002 to do that. And the white cloth, it makes it look harder it makes it harder to see the image because it's brighter. All right. In 1988, there was a big to-do. They took out a strip of cloth and had it carbon dated, carbon-14 dating. People know everything that's living has carbon-14 in it. And it based on how much you have over a period of time, they can kind of guesstimate how old it was. Well, they took a piece less than an inch from here where that patch is. And they tested it. And 3 labs tested it. They all came up with about the same information, and they said, oh, it was from 1290 to 1310. It's a forgery. It had to be made in the Middle Ages. Well, with all the other evidence we had, so they had thousands of evidence showing that it was the burial cloth of Jesus from the 1st century, and one test that said it wasn't, and everyone believed that it wasn't. So scientific stuff stopped after 1988 for a while, until they proved that that carbon dating test was invalid. So if you think about it, do I have a picture? Yeah. So this is up in that corner, which is down here on the picture, on the shroud. They took a piece and they cut 3 pieces. Normally when you do scientific data, you would have taken multiple pieces from all over the shroud and sent it to different places. Well, they took one piece, cut it in 3, and sent it to 3 different places. And to show that, they videotaped them taking the sample, putting it in a glass, and they went in the back room, and that's the last you saw of it. So there was something kind of possibly going on there. Now, This is another picture with ultraviolet photography. There's the patch. They took it from here, right? See, this 1260 to 1390, sorry, that was the date, those three guys. Someone, actually a nurse, happened to watch a documentary on the, I think it was the History Channel, and they showed a close-up of the places of the sample. And for some reason, she said, wait a second, it doesn't look right. Something is wrong, where it kind of changed from thin yarn to thick yarn. So her and her husband did a paper on it and published it, that sample, something's wrong with that sample that they took. So it couldn't possibly be Sufit and Joe Marino. Joe Marino now runs the Shroud of Turin website. Ray Rogers was a chemist major, or chemist scientist, and he had samples still in his possession. And he read the paper and he said, no, they're just lay people. What do they know? So Barry Schwartz, who was the photographer, talked to him and said, wait a second, you have samples, you go check it out. So he checked it out for himself, and sure enough, there's cotton fibers in that sample. Well, Jewish people would not like that. You have one type of fabric. You don't mix cotton with linen or wool or whatever. So then that had to be a patch. So it was what they called an invisible patch. And here is the picture again. And see this, all this off color? That's all contamination. So they took it from the most contaminated part in the whole place, in the whole shroud. So again, this is the manuscript from 1192. This is kind of like defeating the carbon dating, because they show the poker holes here on this picture that was done in the 1100s. So how could the poker holes be on something before 1290 unless they actually saw the shroud? So it had to be in existence prior to that. Oh, and you can also see in here, there's no thumbs. There's no thumbs. When you put something through your hand, it goes through and hits the nerves, and it pulls the thumb in. So the thumb would have been underneath like that. And it's again, no thumbs, no thumbs. So they would have had to know, they would have had to seen the shroud in order to do that picture, that diagram there. And it's also the picture's nude. You would have never seen an actual painting or anything with Jesus nude anywhere prior to that, right? Even on crucifixes now, it's got the modesty cloth. And here's the poker holes again. There's the prayer manuscript there and the actual shroud. All right. So prior to 550, that's year 550. Prior to that, any picture that you saw of Jesus showed him as very young, clean shaven, right? In fact, I saw this over there on the shelf. That picture is up there. The Christ Procurator from St. Catherine's Monastery in the year 550 AD. This Jesus has long hair, has a beard, his eyes, his nose, everything. If you take the shroud against that picture, it matches up pretty well. So whoever did the icon in 550 saw the shroud. Here's a coin from 692. It shows the box here. There's a little box here, like a prayer box that Jews did, and also the crease. Why would you make a coin with a crease in the bottom, unless you've seen the shroud? So that's in 1692, Justinian coin. You can still get those if you have a lot of money. It's gold coin. Again, image of Edessa. That's the picture we saw with Apgar the seventh. All these here are prior, or this one here is after. All Jesus with a beard after 550 in the 500s. From all around. All right. Just this past summer, they wanted to redate the shroud. Well, they didn't want to cut the shroud up anymore, so they used wide scattering X-ray technology. And what that would do is they would take a known figure, a known fabric of a known time frame, and they would do X-rays to it, and it would have a scattering graph. And depending on the graph, it would show how old the linen fabrics, the fiber was. Well, they had one that they knew was from 2,000 years ago, and they matched it to the shroud. So they've actually dated the shroud to the 1st century now, this past summer. So all the things point to Jerusalem. All the things point to the 1st century. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and his brother and led them up to the mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became brilliant white. You know what they're describing? The transfiguration, right? I kind of lied. They kind of know how the shroud is done. What they've done is they've taken an excimer laser and shot it at linen cloth and made a small area that does the same thing as the shroud, right? So they would have taken, and it would have the same characteristics with the darkening and lighting of a linen. But the excimer laser is very powerful, and that was only one of them to make one dot. This is 14 and something feet long of dots. So there's the transfiguration, right? So if you took, we don't have, even if we took all the excimer lasers we have on the earth now, we couldn't do the whole image in one shot, right? So what really they think happened is the resurrection, right? In an instant, 40th 100th of a second, 34 trillion watts of power would be needed to make this image like the laser. Think about that. We don't have that much power on the earth now. And Matthew 17, it says, because that's how much light emitted in a split second from inside a whipped, crucified corpse to burn the image into the shroud of Turin.
How do they come with those figures?
Well, if they can make a dot with an excimer laser and they know the power of that laser, I mean, it's a very powerful laser. It's probably 1 million watts, 2 million watts, or whatever it took. And then they calculate how much it would take wattage to do this. And it was in 40th 100th of a second. Otherwise it would burn, right? There's no burn, there's no other burn marks other than a fire. So that's what they believe happened. What am I doing? Oh, just by an hour. So if you're interested in any other information, Shroud.com. That was Barry Schwartz's website. He started in 1981. He had all this information about the shroud, and I have the book. I didn't bring it with me, but I have the STURP, which is the Shroud of Turin Research Project, 1978, and they published all their findings in a book. So I have that book, and it goes over all the blood testing. Oh, the other thing, the blood. People are familiar with Eucharistic miracles, right? What type of blood is it?
AB.
Guess what's on the shroud? AB. And it's got to be AB positive, because AB positive is the universal recipient. Think about that. Anyone who is AB positive can accept everyone else. And what Jesus always says, I'll take them on to myself. AB negative would only be able to take negative OB, but not everybody. And they believe that Jesus, based on the measurements and stuff, was 5'11" to 6'1", 175 pounds. And at first when I started doing this, I wouldn't say that this was Jesus. It was just a man on the shroud, right? It was just a Jewish man. Because we can't prove it for sure, other than if we had DNA. But who else in history was crowned with thorns, scourged, crucified, buried, and supposedly rose again with witnesses? Just a scourging. Most people, Romans would scourge people and let them go. Because Pilate was hoping to let Jesus go. And it didn't happen. So there's no record of anyone being scourged and crucified with a crown of thorns, with a spear in his side. So I'm personally 99.9% positive that this was Jesus' burial cloth. Now the church won't officially say that, but they say that it's venerable. I mean, you can venerate the shroud, and it's good to do that. The last three popes all were happy to say that. But Barry Schwartz started this because he had all the information, but no one else did. So he says, hey, I have to put a website out there, put all the information, and people can make up their own minds. So he has thousands of papers that scientists did, both pro and con, about the shroud, because he was Jewish, he wasn't Christian. He believed it was authentic, but he didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. So now he knows. He passed away last summer, so he knows one way or the other, right? He won't tell us, but he has all the, and you can also see stuff too. Yes?
If Jesus was attached to that
Yep.
log, then how could anybody help him? I mean,
They would have to pick it up with him. What he ended up taking with Simon, you're talking about Simon and Serene?
Yeah.
They would have probably untied him of it, because he was just tied to it at that point, and they would have given it to him and let him help it towards the end.
Tied to it.
Yeah. Well, he would just probably carry it. Simon would have just carried it.
So
But
he was carrying it, but Jesus was tied to it.
yeah. Yeah. Any? Yes. Oh, sorry.
Is the shroud always on display in Tour or only
No.
very often?
It. Last I heard, it's supposed to be on display sometime this year. It used to come out every 25 years, and then again to 10 years. And Pope Francis had taken it out, I think last year, for special international children's youth day or something. The problem is now, last time I talked to Barry last summer, is that it's tearing. So you saw that relically that's flat, and you saw Pope John Paul watching it, and it's on its side. So they're trying to figure out a way that they can put it flat and have everybody still see it, which means you'd have to have a different setup. And he was saying that he didn't think it was going to come out in 2025, but because we last saw it in 2015.
Have you done much research with the cloth that just had the image of Jesus?
I actually have my own copy of it. It's somewhere here.
At the Sacré-Cœur Cathedral in Paris, France in 1975.
Mm-hmm.
And they had it on display. It was in a reliquary.
Mm-hmm.
And nuns prayed 24 hours a day. They took turns, and they had candles lit
Yep.
everywhere. And so, and they had like a partition you
Mhm.
couldn't go past.
Yep.
But you could see it. And the image I could see very clearly. But
That was probably if you saw an image on it, it's not the Siderium. The Siderium didn't have an image.
there was an image.
So that could have been the veil of Veronica.
Pardon me?
Could have been the veil of Veronica.
That's what it was.
All right, that's different.
Yes.
Yeah, the Siderium doesn't have any image, but 120 or so congruencies on the two between the shroud and the Siderium. If you also take, we were in Montepello in Italy, and they took a photograph on the glass plate of the Divine Mercy, the shroud, and the image at Montepello, and they slid them together, and they fit perfectly. So And if you took the image of that, do you have a question?
Yeah, how long does a lemon fall, what's the life expectancy of it? Like, how long is it supposed to last? Especially.
It's not supposed to last 2,000 years, yeah. But there are some. The one they compared to is 2,000 years old. But just like Our Lady of Guadalupe, that was cactus, and there's no way that should last 500-600 years, right? And that's even more because the image is floating on the cactus. It's not in the thing. So, but yeah, they do find some spices and some other stuff. They also have some flower images, some places on the sides, because they suppose put flowers in there too. But the idea was for them to come back on Sunday morning and finish cleaning up, and they didn't get to do that. So they might not have put it all on the body. Yeah, it's in the tomb ready to be used, and they haven't used it.
Yeah, they have to get them into the tomb by sundown.
Yep.
The next day, that's the Sabbath, so they're not going to do them on the Sabbath.
Nope.
And then Sunday.
Sunday morning, yeah.
Are there any remnants of those spices in the shroud that they saw?
They saw some, but not like he was saying. If they really put it all over the place,
They
no.
said it was 100.
Right, but they said they brought it to the tomb. They didn't ever say that they used it yet, because it was supposed to come back and clean and do all that stuff. It was the Sabbath, so they just kind of like put them in and close the doors. That's why Mary Magdalene was coming to the tomb on Sunday morning. I mean, if I took a picture of you with film and it had negative, how can I tell what color hair you have? I mean, and that's why the ponytail is significant, because the Essenes, John the Baptist was in the desert, right? They believed he was with the Essenes, which was another sect of the Jews that were very particular about washing and everything. So they think that he has some influence from the Essenes, and that's why he has that ponytail. So he had long hair.
That's just a documentary.
Yeah, and you can see it's not touching his face. That's the other thing. Man, I better take notes. See how it's not touching his face? The hair? Because they also think when the image was generated, because there's no, if you were laying on something, your butt would be kind of like pushed flat. It's not flat. The hair is hanging straight down. So they believe that it was in a vertical position when the image was formed. Also, I saw one documentary said, well, they found paint on the shroud. It goes, well, yeah. How much paint did they find? They found maybe a thimbleful. That's because they were making copies, and they were laying them on the shroud to make them relics. A relic of a relic. So there would have been a second-class relic because it touched him. The blood's a first-class relic because it was from his blood. And then that's why they get fragments of paint, different places, flicking all over the place.
I saw a documentary where it mentioned touching the face, that if you try to replicate it and you pull it out, the face would be puffy, whereas his face there is perfect.
Oh, yeah, and it's very serene, too.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not like he'd been tortured. Oh man, I really got... The blood is red on the shroud, right? Can't see it there. But the reason it's red is because it has bilirubin in it. When you're tortured, your body gives off bilirubin. Once it hits the bloodstream, it stays red forever. If we cut, it turns brown eventually, right? That was one of the last things that Barry Schwartz needed to convince him that it was authentic. He says, but it's red. Why would it be red after all these years? Because it has bilirubin in it. That's released from your liver when you're in stress.
And in the garden, too.
In the garden, too. Yep. All right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you.